Hi, I'm Jim Ward of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 20 in our History Bite series. Today we will discuss the momentous Apollo 8 mission, which sent astronauts in orbit around the moon for the first time. Before the famous walk on the moon by Neil Armstrong in July 1969, there was the Apollo 8 mission in December 1968. President John F. Kennedy made the bold public claim that the U.S. would land a man on the moon before the end of the decade when he spoke before Congress on May 25, 1961. The goal was set, and NASA responded to Soviet accomplishments with their own. In February 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. Following the achievements of the crewed Mercury and Gemini programs, NASA engineers embarked on a series of missions to place human footprints on the moon with the Apollo program. The program got off to a horrific start on January 27, 1967, when all three astronauts, Ed White, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee in the Apollo 1 capsule, were killed during a launch rehearsal test that sparked a huge fire. But that catastrophic failure generated extensive redesigns of the spacecraft and a commitment to ensuring that the crew did not die in vain. Just over a year later, on October 11, 1968, NASA launched its first Apollo astronauts into space aboard a Saturn I rocket for the 11-day Apollo 7 mission. Apollo 8 was the second mission of the Apollo program with a crew on board, and the first mission to bring humans to the moon. The astronauts on Apollo 8 were not supposed to visit the moon at all. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration had assigned these men to Apollo 9, a fairly routine test of the Lunar Excursion Module, or LEM, in Earth's orbit. But during the summer of 1968, U.S. officials feared an unexpected Soviet mission to the moon, so just 16 weeks before the scheduled liftoff, they reassigned the astronauts to an incredibly ambitious and dangerous flight. The crew for Apollo 8 included Commander Frank Borman, left, Lunar Module pilot Bill Anders, center, and Command Module pilot Jim Lovell. Spacecraft Commander Borman and crew member Lovell were also crewmates on the Gemini 7 mission, which aimed to test endurance. They spent nearly 14 days living together in a small spacecraft. Borman had also distinguished himself by serving on a review board investigating the Apollo 1 fatal fire in 1967. The mission's third crew member, Anders, was a former fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force. He hadn't flown in space before, but had served as a backup crew member for Gemini 11. The launch date was set for December 21, 1968. The night before the launch, aviation pioneer Charles Lindbergh paid a visit to the Apollo 8 crew. Lindbergh, whose nickname was Lucky Lindy, was the first person to fly solo over the Atlantic Ocean, which he'd done 41 years before. He asked how much fuel they would need to get into space. When Lindbergh heard that the rocket would consume 20 tons of fuel a second, he smiled and said, "In the first second of your flight tomorrow, you'll burn 10 times more fuel than I did all the way to Paris." This flight would be the first crewed launch using the Saturn V rocket. It had launched only twice, succeeding once and failing miserably on its second liftoff. And riding a rocket with such a short and unencouraging record was just the astronauts' first potential obstacle. The launch went off without a hitch, and after settling into orbit around Earth, they performed their final checks and received the go from NASA for translunar injection. On Christmas Eve, millions around the world were watching and listening as the Apollo 8 astronauts, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders, became the first humans to orbit another world. As their command module floated above the lunar surface, the astronauts beamed back images of the moon and Earth and took turns reading from the Book of Genesis. The mission was also famous for this iconic Earthrise image, snapped by Anders, which would give humankind a new perspective on their home planet. Anders has said that despite all the training and preparation for an exploration of the moon, the astronauts ended up discovering Earth. They closed with a wish for everyone, quote, "on the good Earth." The Apollo 8 mission was an important testing ground for the spacecraft systems and navigation techniques that NASA had developed for approaching and orbiting the moon. These systems and techniques made the future lunar landing possible. At the close of the turbulent year 1968, one American wrote to Borman with a simple message: "You saved 1968." The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, the race riots in many American cities, the protests, the war, and a president's political downfall marked that year as one of the most memorable in 20th century history, and the Apollo mission indeed allowed it to end on a momentous note. The astronauts were named Time Magazine Men of the Year. The mission proved that human beings could accomplish something wondrous, and this set the stage for the successful moon landing by Apollo 11 7 months later. To learn more about this historic mission, check out Apollo 8, The Thrilling Story of the First Mission to the Moon by Jeffrey Kluger, available for Interloan and an ebook and audiobook on Overdrive. Thank you all for joining us for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.